Yeah, well, one thing that comes into play that's a problem that we haven't really touched on yet in AI and machine learning is bias,
True.
right? Like that's one problem, right? Is that that we train machine learning and AI off of previous data, right? We use different information. We are talking about how do you collect all that data? You get lots of it. Use that to predict what's going to happen. Well, there's a few things. Like one is that the data that we're using, maybe is that the right data? Is there biases introduced? Is my retirement can be the same as yours, like that it could be totally different, but they're going to optimize for mine but maybe not for yours. Like that's a huge problem that we need to be able to correct, and it's based on the data that comes in that we do those predictions. Another problem that comes in also is, we talked about, if we're using the past to predict the future, we're using data and potential futures. What if we can't see, right? 2008 was a big event. 2020 was another big event that people wouldn't have predicted. Like if you would have said there, I would have been like, that absolutely not. No, this it can't happen, right? Like it wasn't in our minds to be able to put that in there. It's the unknown unknowns, right? We can't predict for those. So how can we utilize that? So it'll make sure that one of the things is understanding that and being able to, like you said, you can't predict far, but shorter, you don't normally you can do a good job. But the other area is, if we're not using AI, what are we using? We're just using gut intuition. We're using other people's piece of information. Like they may not have also known that these things were coming or been able to see it. So it's not a unique problem only to AI, but it is something we need to look at, because it may not react as quickly or be able to put the brakes on as quickly as people may want to. Now that's a very loaded answer, just because who knows how do we put brakes on quick enough for anything like financially? Like it always is tough. But that's some of the things you need to take into consideration when you're looking at these. And the cool part of, at least to me, of like the algorithms and different things like that, is that by understanding those and building it in, then it fixes for that. It hopefully we can prevent repeating past mistakes, which people have a tendency not to do a great job of, right? We don't always, we try to, but it's one of our own internal biases that we have, and it's hard to get away from that. Bringing it in and being able to solve for that is a big advantage I see going on as we continue to evolve. And then also just getting the data right as these things happen, we're going to get better and better at it. So then as we get better, things get better. So then that's a great thing that we see the performance coming in. We're able to leverage that'll continue to evolve in a more positive way that I see people wanting to take advantage of and needing to take advantage of.
Right. Well, bias is a really important point, because let's go back to ChatGPT for a moment here, because that's where the bias conversation has been lately. It's around, we've seen many headlines in the past little while where there's been criticisms of ChatGPT, essentially saying that it's biased, that it doesn't represent everyone equally. So how do you sort of counter that? I guess part of it could be having like a more diverse workforce, but is there other ways that you can counter bias when it comes to AI? Because obviously AI is learning off of the data sets that it's provided, and the data sets to some extent are being procured by humans. So how do you ensure that you reduce or, hopefully eliminate bias?
Well, if I may, I'd like to actually say something about the aspects of bias. So when we say bias, it might be related to fairness aspect, as we all understand during our daily life. But from also a statistical perspective, bias means something slightly different. It also means the bias in your data, or the bias of how you use your data to make certain decisions. For example, if I collect data specifically from certain sources and ignore some other sources, my data becomes biased. And the decisions I will make based on that data will have to be biased. An analogy could be like this. I'm an investment professional, wealth professional, and I'm advising one of my clients to put together a retirement portfolio. And I'm biased towards certain investment elements. Maybe I'm a gold bug, or maybe I'm a technology person and I specifically advise based on using these investment tools. Now, Chris, you mentioned there are black swans coming always from time to time. There are events that are unpredictable. how can I make sure I'm prepared for those? I have to prepare a balanced portfolio with proper hedges in place. And my bias, either introduced through the selective bias coming from that data, or the biases I have regarding favoring certain investment tools over others, that would make me prone to or vulnerable to that kind of black swan events. Why? Because if I make my portfolio 80% certain technology stocks, what if that black swan event makes those technology stocks go down? My entire portfolio will go down with it. So in order to eliminate bias in this sense, and in order to make a balanced approach with proper hedges in place, we have to use much data coming from many more resources, not limited to a certain resource, and that requires again crunching a lot more data, and we have to create much more sophisticated algorithms, because a simplistic algorithm will almost always deviate towards a certain biased form of decision making.
Yeah, like when I think of bias, like there's two things that come to my mind. Like one is like the area of ethical AI, and then also explainable AI. Those are two things that always come up in that. So ethical AI, you touched on, like the fairness, the having the recommendations being based off of good data that's hopefully as unbiased as possible, and then ways to eliminate bias is a big part of what we're looking at, how we can do that. But your question initially was, is there bias there? Yes. Like that you could answer it very quickly on just that. Now, are people trying to improve it? Of course. You can say the same to people. Like, do we have cognitive biases in our mind? Of course we do, right? People have heard of anchoring and there's like tons of these different cognitive biases that every single person has, and there's no way around having them. But one of the things that's really interesting in that, it depends on if you I love the book Thinking Fast and Slow, talks about our, system one, system two, really quick responses versus if we take a step back and actually think about them, we can try to overcome some of those bias. So we try to do that within AI and within machine learning to recognize bias and remove bias. So we're always trying to do that. It's not an easy process. It's not something that just happens overnight. And ChatGPT is very, very early on. So it's going to have more and more of this. And we will be able to try to remove most of it. You never get all of it gone, because also who defines bias, who defines that? There's always going to be different opinions on what that is. So that's one way, is like looking at, the data, the recommendations, how can we improve there? The other part is explainable AI. So what is explainable AI is if, for loan origination, if we're using AI to say yes or no to loans for people, the AI may say yes. And then we say, okay, why? And sometimes there's these different, like deep learning, deep neural networks, and these things that are not understandable. So what that means is that if I say why, we just kind of, I don't know. That's literally like, just don't know. It's now there's ways to get around doing that, but not all AI is explainable, and that may not be acceptable, right? We may not be able to have that, right? We were, chatting a little bit before about some of the legal side of that, right? If I'm in court and the AI judge says guilty, I'm probably going to say why, right? Like give me a good reason. Sorry, just that's what the network said. Like, no, that won't be acceptable. And having explainable AI helps to do that, because then you can understand where the reasoning came from, where the recommendation came from. So then you can start to say, okay, where might this be a little bit incorrect if the answers are not what they should be. And then another thing is just putting, like we talk about, the human in the loop, where AI is creating recommendations to a person to make a decision. And it helps because it can generate insights that we would have never got on our own, right? There's too much data. We can't know everything. So it generates these insights for us, but we decide what's going to happen there. We still have the personal bias. That's a problem there, but you can start to recognize and eliminate the different biases in the models and things like that. So there's some ways that we can get around it. It's just the problem is it's not easy. It's not cheap to do. And you were talking about simplicity versus complexity. Like, we like simple things. We like things that get done, right? I started out by saying we look at solutions that can deliver business value. Sometimes time to market's business value, but then we have to understand what the implications of that are. And those are different decision criteria, evaluation criteria that we make whenever we're doing this type of work.